Who Jumbo Espresso Talk Today community? It's Robin here. I'm so glad that you came through to join us for another uncommon conversation with Professor William Smith from the University of Utah. Well, I admit it has been quite a journey. This is our fourth and final podcast show discussing racial battle fatigue with Professor William Smith. You might remember that we began with an introduction to racial battle fatigue, which is a response to repeated racial encounters or microaggressions. Then we discussed Black rage, which is a normal response, to living Black in an anti-Black environment. Then we took a short break. We needed a break. Everyone needs a break. And we returned last week to discuss how to cope with systemic and individual racism. And this brings us to today's uncommon conversation, which is very uncommon, especially uncommon. I think I'll even call it rare. Today, the Espresso Talk Today team will discuss racial or racist encounters that we've experienced. These are real-life encounters. Nothing was made up. They're not hypothetical. Okay, and I'm going to tell you, discussing them was not easy. It felt almost like reliving them at some point, and this caused stress. It was traumatic, but it's important to discuss these encounters, particularly with a professional like Professor William Smith. You might remember that one coping mechanism that Professor Smith mentioned was to spend time with your community, sharing your experiences with them, and listening to theirs. Professor Howard Stevenson, remember we met with him a few weeks ago to discuss racial literacy. Amazing conversation. Professor Howard Stevenson also discussed the importance of sharing our experiences. He called it storytelling and said that it's important to share our stories and hear the stories of others. Dr. Stevenson stated, and I quote, "Through storytelling, individuals can learn how to observe emotional and physiological reactions to an event before or after the event occurs." That's important to notice, before or after the event occurs. In one story, and I'm in the quote now again, in one story, there exists the freedom to explore challenges and successes without attack in ways that are not possible in social conversations around racial politics, end quote. So as you can see, neither Professor Stevenson nor Professor Smith said that it was easy to discuss these experiences, but they emphasize its importance because it helps to control stress and it helps to feel a sense of control. Racial encounters can challenge a person's feelings of control, so storytelling helps to reclaim it. Another way is journaling. And journaling can help to make sense of feelings with feelings about the racial encounters, without the stress of conversing with other people. So journaling is a more inward-focused activity, but both storytelling and journaling are very recommended. Okay, so today's uncommon conversation served two purposes. First, it allowed Professor Smith to analyze our racial encounters. Of course, he didn't deny our feelings, and we weren't seeking validation of them, but he gave us more context about the wider background and meaning of these encounters. And second, it allowed each person to tell their racial encounter story. This was storytelling. It allowed us to express our feelings about them and to create some healing. That's really important, some healing about the encounter. We talked and we listened, and both are necessary for healing. And I have to say, Asante Sana to Ben and Diane for their strength and courage in sharing their stories. I also say, if I haven't said it already, Asante Sana to Professor William Smith for sharing his expertise and insight with us, and for his compassionate and understanding when hearing our stories. I do encourage you to listen to the previous shows if you haven't heard them already, or to listen to them again. I've listened to them many times and I always get something new. It really is hearing them again for the first time, so I strongly encourage it. And we are going to continue to tap into Professor Smith's knowledge and experience. We have a great resource here. I mean, this is a rare opportunity. So we're going to get as much information and insight as we can in this short time together. Unfortunately, this is our final meeting with Professor Smith, but he's given us so much important information and so much to reflect upon. And although our discussions are ending, the conversation really is far from over. We have more from Professor Smith today with the discussion of actual racial encounters, and this is where we'll start today. Ben and Diane will arrive in just a minute, and then we'll get started. While we wait for them, let me remind you a bit about Professor William Smith. Professor William A. Smith is a full professor and department chair in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society at the University of Utah. He also holds a joint appointment in the Ethnic Studies Program, African American Studies Division, as a full professor. Professor Smith, Dr. Smith, is the co-editor of the book, The Racial Crisis in American Higher Education, published in 2002. His research primarily focuses on racial battle fatigue. His work has appeared in many prestigious journals, and now he's appearing again with the Espresso Talk Today team, and we are so lucky. Ben and Diane have arrived. By the way, we will discuss on today's show several events and issues that involve racial stress or racial trauma. This can be difficult. It can bring up feelings and emotions that can be intense, even if the events happened a long time ago. If you start to feel stress or trauma or symptoms of anxiety or depression, then take a break. Take time to breathe. Please don't feel weak. It takes strength to take care of yourself. The Espresso Talk Today team supports you in taking care of yourself mentally and emotionally. We'll be right here when you return. Let's turn now to today's Uncommon Conversation with Professor William Smith, already in progress.
And if we have models out there, we know that we've tried. We've had Black Wall Street in Tulsa. We've had Greenwood in Florida. We had Bronzeville in Chicago. We had Harlem, well, through periods of the history, Harlem in New York, right? Parts of Philadelphia. So we've had places, Chocolate City, D.C., but we don't have the infrastructure. And part of that is because white supremacy would not allow it. But we have to remind ourselves that resist is the final R. And that's resist re-traumatization. That means we have to own our own stuff. And we have to be unapologetically black. Right? Unapologetically black.
So let's start talking about racial encounters, or we just call them what they are, racist encounters, because being unapologetically black means that you will have to deal with and confront these kinds of encounters sometimes on a daily basis. But you've had an interesting experience.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can,
Okay.
I guess, to go through that STEM thing. Yeah, so yesterday I was biking to a friend's place. And yeah, everyone's biking in this country, just for those who don't know. And I was just making a turn, and yeah, I don't know, this old white woman who was on the corner where I was turning, she wasn't in the street or in the bike lane. It was a pretty standard situation. Yeah, I pretty much just made the turn, and she just kind of punched my arm, and which was very strange. Well, not very strange. This happened before, similar situations. But yeah, that made me pretty angry and rather confused. But mostly I was just angry that, there's nothing you can really do about it in that situation. I mean, I can't really stop there in the middle of the bike lane and just talk to her for many reasons. Um, so yeah, that's one situation we could uh, analyze through this framework.
Well, and that's a good example, um, because what tends to happen is gendered racism
Hmm.
is just like a virus, but the host of it doesn't have to experience the outcome of it. So when that woman hits you, she basically left you with something that probably you had a physiological and a psychological and emotional response, even though you didn't have necessarily behavioral response.
Hmm.
And that sits with you.
Yeah.
Why did she do that? Why she hit me? The audacity. I have to be prepared for just a random white person, white woman hitting me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So all that's left on your mind with all the other stresses that you might have while you were trying to de-stress by having a bike ride.
Yeah.
Now that's ruined. And so that becomes part of the sum total of the experience that perpetuates your racial battle. Well, at least it doesn't lower your racial battle fatigue,
Yeah.
right? So your racial battle fatigue for most people are going to always be high, no lower than medium. And these different events keep it going up. And then once it starts to come down, something else happens and it goes back up. So, I mean, that's part of the problem, but she can walk away and then forget.
Yeah, because it didn't hurt obviously at all. Like that's not the point. It's just a kind of absurd situation.
Right.
Uh,
But it doesn't have to physically hurt
yeah,
because she could have called you the N word,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
But see, here's the thing, the physical part that you said didn't hurt was just the external pain of it to the
Hmm.
body, but it hurt the internal pain. So when people who have gone through trauma, there's something called the amygdala
Yeah.
in the brain. So you probably know what that is. And so that amygdala, um, it kind of takes control. It helps with your management of your emotions, your um, alertness, and if you've been traumatized by racism or something, it also controls anger and response, rates, and how you act,
Hmm.
right? And so when you deal with that and your amygdala is already on guard, then you go right back to a state of I got to defend myself,
Yeah.
right? So when do black people get an opportunity to be human is the question. Totally human. We don't even know what that feels like.
Mm.
And that's the other part of this fear factor. What if we were able to be in an environment where we can totally feel comfortable and for the first time in our life not have to think about what it means to be black?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is a privilege. That's part of white privilege. You don't have to think about it ever. And for us, it's always on our mind, it's in our dreams, and that's why our cortisol levels, even during our nocturnal cortisol levels, are high. And then, so stress is high, and then high blood pressure, then heart attacks or strokes. And then we don't do ourselves any better by eating the food that we eat and being sedentary. We have to realize that fighting against white supremacy and gendered racism is like preparing for a heavyweight fight. We have to exercise, we have to walk, we have to eat better, we have to meditate. We have to do all of those things because every day our body is being put at war.
Yeah. And it sounds like when you were talking about some of the ways in which we can kind of take away from that, that stress and for that matter, the fatigue. I mean, some of our institutions like our HBCUs or our Greek organizations or other affinity groups is maybe oftentimes serve as a means and mechanism that kind of allow us to step back and decompress from having to think about or be concerned about or be on guard, as you had mentioned, of being Black, because you're in an environment where there's others who are like you and are like-minded to be able where you can commiserate or, for that matter, identify or provide support to one another.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to share another incident similar to what Ben had talked about in terms of racial indignities, if you will. And actually, I'd like to say too, in thinking back, I'll never forget, Robin's brother was graduating from UCLA Law School, and I was at his graduation, and Angela Davis was the guest keynote speaker. And one of the things that stuck with me, and it's been quite some time since we graduated, I won't give my age, but in essence, one of the things she said is that white folks don't know how close they are to a beat down every day based on the indignities that we have to
Jesus,
deal
yeah,
with.
it's dangerously accurate. Yeah.
And it's like, I think about that when these microaggressions, macroaggressions, whatever, because it's like I could choose, like you said,
Right? Yeah.
to act out and beat somebody up, which again would be good for me, or
Yeah.
I have to work through this paradigm that you had identified to work through those type of situations. But one of the situations I actually experienced this a few years ago. I was in Utah actually visiting my niece, and we were at a CVS store, and we were just picking up a few items to take an evening, event or some sort. And we were standing in line with our items, and then suddenly this white guy and his son decided they were going to jump the line in front of us and go up to the cash register. And, it was obvious that we were standing in line. It was no indication that we weren't waiting for the next, cashier to be available. And my niece and I both looked at each other and we, oh my God, is this what we're really seeing here? Did he really jump the line? And so I spoke up and said, excuse me, sir, but the line is back here, and that you and your son need to get in line. And he turns around and mumbles something. And then it became apparent that the son was embarrassed by the father's behavior because he knew that they had jumped the line. And so I spoke up again, a little more loudly to embarrass him further. I said, excuse me, sir, we were standing in line, we were next. The line is back here. And he turned his back to me at that point and just continued the transaction. But it's at that point where, again, the cashier, she didn't know what to do. His son is embarrassed. And I'm, again, one step away from picking up something and hitting in the back of the head. But of course, I can't do that because I would be the one arrested, for assault and battery. So it's in those minuscule instances where you have to kind of do the calculation, do the calculus of how do I manage this appropriately so that it takes care of me. And also my niece needs to know that I'm protecting her and standing up for her as well. Because actually, she was actually I was standing in line with her. So, it becomes an issue of, okay, do I go to the manager? Do I, try to pull this guy aside and explain to him how we are not invisible, that this is a not so subtle form of racism? Or do I just breathe deeply, take 10 seconds and move on and go to the next cashier? I mean, it's all those kind of calculuses that you have to go through to manage what is enraging and symbolic in so many different levels and ways in which he obviously disrespected us, wanted to treat us as subhuman. Uh, uh, we were invisible to him, and he didn't care. And also he knew that the system was likely in place, i.e., at the store, that would reinforce this behavior because no one said anything, and there were, other cashiers, I'm sure a manager nearby. But again, he's able to get away with this and engage in this behavior, very aggressive, I consider, hostile behavior because of how he viewed us, as people, as individuals, or lack thereof. So, like I said, it's enraging.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Enraging.
Yeah.
Another component of that is, despite his son's embarrassment, he was teaching his son a lesson
He was.
that black people don't matter,
Right.
that or we matter more than anybody else.
Right.
There's rights and privileges, and you'll see that you can get away with this,
Right.
right? Because the cashier didn't know what to do, which
Right.
the person could have just said, "Oh, you got to get in line."
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen
Had
that
it
happen.
been a
Right.
black person at the cash register, they say, "Hey, what you doing? Get your
Right.
butt back at the bank."
Right.
You
Exactly.
know.
I see. Reinforced it
So,
likely.
but whiteness again is a concept that reinforces itself with certain rights and privileges and benefits,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, what the cashier did was reinforce the status quo, whether they wanted to or not. It happened. And so,
Right.
what really happens with black people is we exist between risk and fear. Risk and fear all the day
That's a
long.
really good way.
And so the risk is, what if I respond the way I really want to respond?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lawyer, I got a JD, I got a nice car, I got a house, and I hit this sucker in the back of his head, and then they get my stuff, right?
Right. Right.
Right.
What
And
about M&Ms or something? No, but
right. And then the fear part is multifaceted because it could be, I just don't feel like it. My blood pressure is already going up. Uh, you know, something might happen to me if I speak out, like if it's at work or something, I see something, behavior, and I'm fearful because of what could happen to me. So this risk and fear is very stressful, and that's the negotiation that we have to dance with every day, trying to persist in a predominantly white environment, and that predominantly white environment is not healthy for us.
Mhm.
And so that's why I believe that if we have black communities that we reinvest in, make sure that they're strong, um, we can overcome a lot of this stuff. Because what we come to the table as power brokers, and we don't give our votes away. No, no, no. We'll finance the people who do what we want them to do, right? Instead of just being prostitutes. And the black community has been prostituted for way too long.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Professor Smith, I did. Of course, I've had a lot of these kind of experiences too, but mine is more about, Ben was just telling me that, he watched Colin in black and white. And I remember watching that and thinking, well, at the time, I could only take it in small dosages. I mean, I was just shaking watching that. And thinking even back about it, I still tremble and think about how did they behave this way about the parents, and everything you expected to happen is no, don't let that happen. And it did. And I mean, is that kind of anticipatory? I mean, nothing's actually happened,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just remembering. I mean, I can feel it viscerally, how the situation and how I felt then.
That's
right.
normal.
Right. And if I can add to Robin's comment, how do parents, basically protect their children, or for that matter, help, them navigate? Because with Robin, with Ben, and for me, with my niece, I want to be able to set an example of how to appropriately handle these things so that they have the tools and that they can see how it can work in real time.
Right. Yeah, we have to be more disciplined. And we have to, again, look back at the cultural strengths that we've had, the memories that we have, what was told to us before, what were those things that were in place, that was not what somebody else on the outside told us. Because remember, the COINTELPRO disrupted our culture. We had a lot of strength in this up, to the 60s. And we were doing a lot of great things. And somebody from the outside said, no, this is problematic. And we had no, and you saw the divorce rates go up, imprisonment go up. You saw drugs being put into the community. All these things is an attack on the community, and we act like we ain't see it happen,
Yeah.
and we buying into this stuff. So part of it is to teach our children age appropriate information.
Okay.
Watch movies, shows, or a talk that you can then break down. What I used to do, especially with my oldest son, and even with my other children, is I would take them to lectures on campus with me when somebody comes in, and he would listen, and then we'd talk about it when we got home. And not long ago, he's will be 36 this year, I think.
Wow.
No, oh, really?
He, he he was talking about, remember when you took me to this and that, and we did blah blah blah. And so he's trying to put that, give that to his children, right? Pass that stuff down. I want to do model after what behaviors I grew up in, and what traditions I grew up in, and what lessons I had, um, and tweak it for today's time with my children. So, it's all that we got to realize. Our children are intelligent. They're bright and they're sponges. You might not see it immediately, but that's that seed that's being planted back in the rose garden, because you're fertilizing it, you're watering it, and you're giving it appropriate sunlight, and it can grow as long as you make sure the environment is healthy. And so, that is what our children need to understand, and then understand anti-Blackness. People, I mean, they feel it, they see it, they every day, you know. But how do you navigate that? Right? We have to be open and honest with our children and say, well, there are a lot of people that don't like black people, and it's for these reasons, right? Now that doesn't mean that everybody you encounter will not like black people or be anti-black, but because of who and what we are and what we come from, and as um, beautiful people who were very peaceful people before outside interruption. Yeah, there were some wars and conflicts later on, and many of those was manufactured by colonizers. But we have a strong cultural background, heritage, and this is what we want to perpetuate. And you represent a family, right? And a family is just one component of that culture. And so when they feel that cultural strength, that's part of the coping factors and the resistance, then they'll start to say, okay, yeah, I see this. It's almost become like they're clear about what the matrix is, the racial
Yeah.
matrix.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
They
Okay.
Neo and those other folks. So they say, okay, yeah, I can see the bullets, right? I can dodge the
Dodge.
bullets. And that's the PPE that we're giving our kids. When we don't give them the PPE, that protective equipment to deal with the virus of anti-Blackness, what we're doing is we're setting them up for a slow death.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Well, gee, I think on that note, I've finished my espresso.
Yeah.
Well, actually.
I need a drink.
Yeah, so did I.
I think-
Wow, Professor Smith, this is been an amazing discussion, really. And I mean, I love the history and the culture, and really, really, great, well, practical things for us to do too to fight this, because we have to. We just can't let this keep going on, and not being aware of what's going on, and succumbing to it. And I thought you made a really good statement about how our bodies, our bodies are human lie detectors. That we can't. We may not mentally, we may think, oh, okay, I'll just let it go, but the body's saying something else, and we gotta listen to that.
We try to divorce um, our brain from our body, and the body will tell you everything you need to know, and the brain will lie to you. But when you put those two things together, and that's putting reestablishing order and then promoting health.
That's reestablishing order. Mm. So, wow, this is now been really helpful, really interesting, and a fun talk too. I like that. We were able to laugh too at times. You
Yeah.
know. So thank you so much, Asante Sana, Billy. And
You all, and it was my pleasure.
Yes, very powerful. Thank you so much for imparting that wisdom and that information.
Yeah, really.
Wow.
Much appreciated. And the information I think will be very valuable and could be applicable to a lot of different people. So thank you.
Good luck in school.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right. All
Okay.
right.
Thank you so much again, sir.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
Right.
Bye. Wow. 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 Oh, that was powerful. Oh, I'm so sorry, but this is the end of our discussion with Professor William Smith. But this uncommon conversation is over, but the problem is far from over and far from resolved. Professor Smith asked a question that stuck with me today. When do Black people get an opportunity to feel human? What if we were able to be in an environment where we can totally feel, and for the first time in our lives, not have to think about what it means to be Black? Well, this was the first time that I'd heard these questions, and the first time that I've actually asked myself these questions. And they definitely made me think, what would that feel like? In today's show, we presented several racial encounters to Professor Smith. His responses were very helpful and really so compassionate and caring, too. One thing that I noticed was that no one was surprised about any of these experiences. You couldn't see us because this is a podcast, but we were all nodding in recognition that we've experienced the same or similar type of situation. Have you heard the term gendered racism? This came up in response to Ben's discussion about being hit by, or attacked by really, these older white women when he was riding his bike. The older white women who hit Ben did so because they knew that they were in a superior and protected position to do so. And Ben knew that he was in a risky position if he said or did anything in response. So this brings up another term, amygdala. That was a really new term for me, and it's kind of a strange term, but this is a part of the brain that helps manage emotions, and in the case of racial trauma, it controls anger and behavior. Even though being hit by the women didn't cause any physical pain, they caused internal pain, and that stays with the victim long after the aggressors, these older white women, long after they've forgotten all about it. Now, Diane's racial encounter was similarly traumatic. The actual incident lasted longer and in some ways was more confrontational. Diane had more opportunities to address the aggressor, which she did with increasing power. Shout out to Diane. However, the white man simply ignored her. using his inherent privilege and power in the situation that he knew granted him superior position against Diane. Professor Smith noted two important points. First, the white cashier in the situation allowed the situation to occur and continue. She took the path of least resistance, which was to allow the white customer to mistreat the black customer. It would have taken courage and strength to change that flow of power in the situation, and the cashier obviously did not want to get involved. The second point is that the white customer, who cut the line, was teaching his son that white people can mistreat black people without any consequences. As Professor Smith said, quote, he was teaching that black people don't matter, or that white people matter more than anyone else, end quote. I have to again say wow, because I always felt that, but it's really hard to hear those words, but they're so obviously true. These were common racial encounters, and Professor Smith's comments were powerful and insightful. Although they only involved the immediate people, these encounters, the racial encounters actually gave messages and taught lessons that went beyond the immediate people involved, particularly about racial dynamics and racial power. That just gets reinforced over and over again. When these encounters happen, we, black people, are often told, oh, just forget about it, or don't let it bother you, or this one I really don't like, don't be so sensitive. But these analyses show how bad and dangerous those perhaps well-meaning, pieces of advice are, but they're really dangerous. Finally, I want to point out Professor Smith's statement that, in quotes, black people exist between risk and fear all the time, end quote, between risk and fear all the time. Well, this is a stressful negotiation that we have to dance with every single day, trying to exist and persist in an anti-black environment. But we are not alone in this stressful struggle. We do have coping mechanisms that can help us exist and persist and be healthy. I hope you'll listen to the previous podcast show called Surviving Racial Encounters, where we discuss these coping mechanisms in much more detail. But today, Professor Smith repeated the importance of cultural strength and community as ways to protect ourselves from the effects of racial battle fatigue. Even watching movies and discussing the racism or white supremacy or the racial dynamics in the movie can be helpful. Also, learning Black history and Black culture and Black traditions can be coping mechanisms that bolster one's cultural strength. These are particularly effective for children and young adults. And remember, discipline and consistency are essential. Teaching the lesson and teaching it over and over and over are essential. Many thanks, Asante Sana, to Professor William Smith for discussing these racial encounters with us. And a huge Asante Sana to Professor Smith for this entire discussion on racial battle fatigue. 4 episodes. He really, gave us his all, and we're so appreciative. We're honored that he spent so much time with us to provide this important information and these insights about living Black in an anti-Black environment. That's a lot of information, and that's a lot of time. So we really appreciate his generosity. And a big Asante Sana to Diane and Ben for their courageous participation on all of these shows. They're good friends and definitely uplift my life in so many different ways. Please join us on Instagram at Espresso Talk Today for more information and more community building. Thanks, Espresso Talk Today community, for coming through again today and every day. And remember, now more than ever, soul, strength, and reparations. Asante Sana. Ashe.